Welcome to Tea with Maggie and Linda. I'm Maggie Murphy.
I'm Linda Jennings.
And we are pleased, as always, to be able to come and visit with you today through TV. And we just want to thank you for watching the show. And we praise you for being listeners and watching and hopefully taking notes. And we still encourage you, if you can find it in your hearts, to send contributions. You know, it takes a lot to keep the show on the TV. And I do run into those of you who say you've seen the show. In fact, this past weekend, I attended a class reunion, y'all. 50 years, I want you to know that.
I told you one of us was getting old, and I didn't want to talk about it.
So 50 years, and we had quite a few members show up, and I was just blessed to, my first one, and I attended it, had lots of fun, and the MC on Friday night introduced each person, each classmate, and he stood up and he says, and they put me down as Reverend, and that's not the title that I want. But anyway, to my point is, he stood up and said that, okay, and Maggie Melson Murphy, and he said, yes, she's our TV celebrity. And I thought, how did he? So some of you say you watch the show, so continue to watch, and just, we need that encouragement. So,
yes. Hard to think of the term celebrity, Maggie, when we got 1,000 things to do, but we still have to study for the show. Everybody thinks TV's so glamorous, I mean? It's just something that God gives you to do, and you're obedient to do it, and you do it with joy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Where you been? We missed you. Everybody missed you. What's up?
Been under the weather a bit, and then have things going on in the family, which everybody does. I mean, everybody I talk to has something going on. In fact, this lady that comes by my house for insurance payment, she was giving me, we traded stories, and her story is about her husband. So I just, and the things that she's going through. Yeah. So a lot of people, a lot of you are going through, and that's what I want to do, is to encourage you not to give up, to hold on. Yes. This will get better.
It will. Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the things that attracted me to this article. I got the October issue of Charisma magazine. And it's a Christian magazine, obviously, and there was an article in here. And the truth of the matter is, I guess it's because you and I just flat getting older, Maggie, but I mean, half the planet's sick. Yeah. And so I found this wonderful article about a gal that was sick, and I thought I'd share it with you. And Maggie and I make a few comments on it. The title is Still Standing Despite Disease and Death. Yeah. And she said, Mary Pappas wasn't sure she'd have a shot at a normal life. Diagnosed with a rare form of cancer of the thymus gland at age 23, Maggie. Yeah. That's sort of like your niece. She's so young, so young. She then battled cancer no less than 6 times. Mm. I didn't know somebody could get to 6 times. 6 times, plus suffered a miscarriage and lived to tell about it. In her new book, Courage, Hope, and Healing, Pappas writes of the first tumors doctor found when she was a young newlywed. Yeah. My aunt, 80 years ago, I think it was 6 months after she got married, she was diagnosed with cancer. Yes. Terrible thing, brand new newlywed, which turned out to be just one of many tumors. Yes. She endured radiation, chemotherapy, experimental treatment, and surgery after surgery. After surgery, folks. You learn when you learn who you are and who Christ is when you're right in the middle of your needs. Yes. When you are weak, and God is strong. Pappas says she learned to rely on this truth again when she had her miscarriage. It was devastating, as she believed God had promised her a child. Now, we've all got promises of God. Yes. And a lot of times it just doesn't seem, we're in a hurry, and we're functioning in time, God's functioning in eternity. He isn't worried, we're the ones worried. But we get feather ruffled that God is not going to keep his promise. She said, I thought, Lord, you blew it. And I'm not getting off this floor until you tell me something. Now, I know there are people, Maggie, that believe you ask God for something, and you believe he gave it to you, he answered it, you thank him, and on you go. And I believe there's truth to that. But if you search Scripture and how God does things, he doesn't always do the same thing the same way.
No.
You just look at the way folks were healed.
Right.
And so God also honors the knock and knock and knock and knock and knock. I'm sitting here, Father, until you say something or till you do something. So she said, God did speak, promising restoration and a double blessing. A year later, she gave birth to 2 healthy boys.
Yes.
One of my next book, one of them I've got in the back of my mind, is called Miracles in the Midst.
Yes.
You go through things, but God does miracles in the midst of it. He makes a way when there seems to be no way, she says. Even though we go through really hard times in life, God sees the big picture that we just don't see. For Pappas, now listen to this. For Pappas, who is finally cancer-free after 30 years.
Yeah.
30 years. Yes. God has not only restored life, but also is using her to speak into the lives of others. Today, she's an advocate for cancer patients and survivors, using her story to often encourage others at churches, conferences, and retreats, saying God used her to help those who suffer with sickness or loss, even when she was in the midst of her own cancer battle.
Yes.
I was thinking about that, and I remember Tom and I lost 4 babies, and the second one was, I carried the longest. And, he kind of popped half out at home, and I didn't know what had happened. And so I reached down and I felt his foot. They got me to the hospital, and then the doctor pulled the rest of the baby out. And how can I say this? He asked me if I wanted to see the child. Mm-hmm. And I hesitated because I thought, I'll never be able to get the look of my dead child out of my eyes. Mm-hmm. And before I could think it through, he had her take the child away. Well, that made me feel just, you know what I mean? These torments in my mind. So I went home, and then I ended up back in the hospital a few days later with a high fever. And which meant I could have had an infection or something. Right. And so he was out of town. He went from the airport straight to the hospital and came in to see me, and he thought he was encouraging me. He said, I just got the autopsy back, and he said, Linda, the baby couldn't have lived. He didn't have a urinary tract, only had 1 kidney, clubfoot. There were just so many things wrong. Mm-hmm. And he thought he was encouraging me because I had lost the baby. So, he went on home, and that thing hit me, Maggie. Yeah. The whole thing hit me, and I was just boo-hooing all alone in that hospital room. And all of a sudden, in comes a nurse. Yeah. And she said she was, and I think I'm getting these floors right, she was on the 5th floor, and I was on the 2nd floor. And she said she had just come down to the 2nd floor and was just walking through. She had, and heard me crying, mm-hmm. and came into the room. And when she did, all I did was encouraging God. Through the boo-hooing, I said, no, this is all right. I'm sorry. I just needed to get a little crying out. God is faithful. He'll turn this thing for my good. God has done so many things for me. I remember the time and she sat there bug-eyed. And at the end of it, she said, I don't know. I came in here to encourage you, and you're the one that encouraged me. Yes. And Maggie, the thing is that out of my own pain, when I encourage somebody else, my eyeballs dried just like that. Yeah. The pain was gone because I poured into somebody else. Yes. And that's what she said, in essence, that God was doing. Right. And I know when you were in the hospital, you did the same thing. Yes. You were supposed to be dead. And then when they opened you up, you had so many things wrong, he didn't know where to begin. But you always encouraged others. Yeah. Yeah. And that's as we say, that's the God in us. Yeah. And he works in this way. What he did for me is he got me to the point that nothing else mattered but him. Yes. It didn't matter. Finances didn't matter. House didn't matter. Family didn't matter. Nothing was as important as my relationship with him. Exactly. That's where he got me to. And then out of that, once that was worked out, then I could begin to climb out of that pit. Yeah. I could begin to say, okay, well, with his help. Yeah.
Him guiding and leading me,
Yeah.
we'll make it through this.
Yes.
And
He was faithful.
Yes.
You still here? You still here? God is faithful.
Yes.
And then the other thing that grabbed me, Maggie, was that God, I'm going to be very careful how I say this. The manifestation of healing doesn't always happen immediately. Now, we're going to assume we're healed because by His stripes we are healed. We're going to assume that. But the manifestation may take a while. Took 30 years for her.
Yes.
But it's not that God said, no, I'm not going to heal you.
Right.
And through the whole thing, she obviously stayed in faith.
Yes.
And then at the end of it, at the end of it, and I think I said this a few weeks ago, a friend of mine vehemently disagrees with me on this, but I personally believe that generally speaking, if you've been through something, it's easier for you to minister life to somebody than if you haven't been through anything, especially if it's the same thing. Example, somebody can come to me who's lost babies.
Yes.
They can blow snot all over my new $39.99 blouse because I have been there.
Yes.
And we can share on the same experiential level.
Yes.
And so she was able to do that.
Right.
But some people say, well, and we hear this, you and I hear this a lot, well, I've been sick for so long. God's just not going to heal me. She was 30 years.
Yes.
30 years.
Yes.
So she is able to go to people who are giving up, saying, no, God hasn't healed me. He's just not going to do it. I'm so depressed. I guess I just want to leave. And say, no, wait a minute.
My theory is unless God tells you that He's not going to heal you, then you still have to hold on to that that belief and that trust that he will, that He's able, and that He will. And some people give up, especially after a few years. But if you read the Word and you see that there were people there that were not healed right away. You know, and then I think about the woman that had 18 years, she'd been stooped over. And she walks into a synagogue or whatever one day, and he just decided, I'm going to heal her here now.
Done.
It's done.
Boom.
So it's up to Him.
Yes, yes. And the balance that it's up to us to keep our eyes on Him.
Yes.
You know, and if you got any sense, if you're sick and the doctors aren't doing such a hot job, Dr. Jesus is the best. I mean, there's just
none like Him.
I remember I got Raynaud's syndrome, and long story short, they were going to give me, that's where the blood doesn't go to your tips, and they wanted to cut off fingers and all this other kind of stuff. And I wasn't going to take the medication because they said, oh, it'll open up your veins. I said, well, does that mean it's going to open up the veins in my brain and my heart? And he looked at me like, you ain't supposed to ask that, you know. And I went to Dr. Jesus, and boom, somewhere down the line, He healed me. So, whoo, God is good, y'all. Go get yourself some tea. Maggie and I'll be back in just a second.
I was born and raised in the big house, you know, a breeder kennel. My life was a cage and concrete floors until I was rescued and given a good home. Now I'm so happy. I'm loved and cared for, but it's really hard for me to be happy when I know thousands of others are still in prison facing an uncertain fate.
What's happening?
Hey, how's it going?
If you think you can find a place in your heart and home for one of my less fortunate friends, Please, please visit your local rescue group or animal shelter today.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome back to Tea with Maggie and Linda. On the first portion of the show, we were talking about healing, and we are on that subject because, first of all, the Lord has blessed us and encouraged us to talk about it.
Yes.
But secondly, is that I've run into so many of you who have issues, who are in need of healing, and I tell you something. I know for me, the last few weeks has been a battle. But I praise God that the one thing that I knew throughout the battle is that the battle is His. When I win, when I come through, then I give Him praise and glory, every day for that. Because even now, and the thing that He showed me doing this walk is that, first of all, and I tell you this, and I know I hop on this a lot, is that what He says to me is, I want to get you straight. And
Says that to all of us.
that's the thing. You're going through and you're moaning and groaning, and you've got this going on and this issue and that. Let's get you straight, Maggie. And he came back to me with love. He says, now, first of all, you can't get any place if you're not loving. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, because there's so many things going on, so many people acting up, and you're thinking, you begin to have these things that come into you that you don't have the right attitude. That's just the bottom line. So he said, okay, first of all, you've got to get the right attitude, and that's love. He says, and I told you before, love me. If you love me as you should with everything you got, then you'll love your neighbor. You can't love your neighbor and not love me. And then so he said, and then you've got to trust. So he gave me scriptures. Trust me. Don't go around moaning and groaning and talking about how bad things are and where you're going to be. Trust me. I own it all. He says, and then here comes the third one that you all have a problem with. You have a big problem with this. He says, obeying. He said, if I can get you to the point that you do what you're supposed to do, you obey me, then there's no problem. All the stuff that's going on, all the things that we consider, he said, if every person that's involved in whatever is going on was to obey me.
Oh, boy.
So he's been working with me. So I didn't mean to take all that time, but I just want to share that with you. Because he's healing me, not just physically, but he's healing me spiritually. And I'm grateful for that because it's making me a different person, I tell you. It's making me a different person. So
yeah, I've told the story before that when Tom and I first got married, we were a mess, and both of us had our issues. And anyway, I got saved, and I went to the Lord one day, and I said, "Can't you do something with him?" And as audibly as can be, he came back to me and he said, "Young lady," I mean, this was 36-7 years ago, and I can still hear it today. He said, "Young lady," and when God starts it out, young lady, it ain't going to be good. It ain't going to be good. He said, "Young lady," he said, "you're the one I want to deal with.
Yes.
You leave him to me and let me do my dealings with you, and I'll handle him."
Yes.
And man, I was at a crossroads, Maggie. God says something like that. You are at a crossroads. You're going to go straight ahead and be obedient to what he said, or you're going to go to your left or your right, or turn around and go back.
Yes.
3 ways that aren't him and 1 way that is. And man, I broke down and boo-hooed. It was the hardest thing, one of the hardest things I've ever done, because I was mad and upset and, frustrated and all those things. But I said yes.
Yes.
And 38 years later, wow, yes. I got a good husband.
See?
And then recently, I just know so many people at my age that have elderly parents.
Yes.
Elderly parents. And if you want to lose your salvation, teasing you. But I didn't have a real good attitude towards my mother. You were talking about attitudes. I didn't have a real good attitude towards my mother. I teasingly have said I did not come out of that woman's womb. We just aren't anything alike. She, I'm talking about the things of God, and she whips off to, a bridge, or she whips off to something. I said, whoa, come back. Let's talk about God. The interest just isn't there. And other things. And, but also, and from experience that when a lot of times when parents get older, they're absolutely, utterly self-absorbed.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And so I didn't have a good attitude, and my brother didn't help because he had a worse attitude than I did. And so one day, somebody in the family was just blasting me about my mother had money to take care of herself. She didn't, yada, yada, yada. And all I saw while they were blasting me, Maggie, was how faithful you were, that your parents could be just as obstinate, just as, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you were faithful and walked them with the right attitude to the grave. Mm-hmm. And I felt so dirty. I felt so dirty as I'm listening to her. She got her own money. She can take care of herself. I'm going to do my thing and not with her and yada, yada. And seeing you. And I hung up that phone and I repented before God Almighty. I have cut off that relationship. I will not hear anybody speak against my mother. Yes. Has she changed? No. But I've changed.
Yes.
I've changed.
Yes.
And I don't mind being with her anymore. That whole relationship has changed. And Maggie, God opened up the windows of heaven.
Yes.
I know it has to do with tithing. I'm taking it out of context, but the principle's still there.
Yeah.
And every time I turn around, there's a blessing here that wasn't happening, a blessing there that wasn't happening. For me.
Yes.
Over and over and over, it's attitude. And I'm telling you, that's the same thing when it comes to healing.
Yes.
One of the first things we need to do when we need to be healed. Now, I'm not putting God in a box and say he won't heal if you're being a little snotty about something. But generally speaking, it is wisdom that the first thing you do is check your attitudes.
Yes.
What are your attitudes?
Yes.
And
I know when I was in the hospital, and these pictures will forever be engraved on my mind, is that I knew the doctors because there was several doctors involved.
Now, you were in the hospital for you, not with your parents.
For me.
Yeah.
For me. And
you just remember that good-looking doctor I chased off.
But they would go through my chart, and I could hear them talking sometimes, and I could hear them flipping the pages. And they would walk into my room, and then they would look, and then they would back up. One doctor backed out the door and came back in, checked the name to see if I was the person on the chart. And that's why I said you can't judge people by what you read or what you've got to know that God is right in command. Yeah. And so I would because God blessed me to be able to smile, to be able to say, I'm still here, to be able to have the attitude, which I believe brought me through. Yes. But they would come in and they would say, are you? And I said, yes, I am. And it got to be funny because, I said, look at this, Lord. But it was the God in me. And that attitude that I had. And see, he got me to the point that I knew after going under all those different times is that if I didn't come out one time, it was okay. Because I knew where I was going. Yes. And so when I got all that together, and then to be able to hear them come in, and as you were saying, it has to do with attitude. Yeah. I have a niece who is gravely ill, and I'm hoping that she can keep a positive attitude. To be able to endure this. Yeah. And the thing is, you look at it as if I could go through it for her, I would. Yeah. But I can't. Yeah. And I believe God uses each of us to be able, he knows what he has in store for us. And even though we want to take on everything and we want to manage it and we want to change it, and it's not that's not what he prefers.
His plans for us is do us good and not harm.
So there is.
Yes, attitude.
Yes. Yes. Attitude is very important.
I've got a tape series. There's a tape series I'm going to get. Sid Roth has been on a roll lately, and that was a woman on healing. And you can say something the same thing 5 different ways.
Yes.
You hear it 4 times and yeah. But you hear it the 5th time and it's just a little tweak, just a little bit, and boom, that thing hits you.
Yes.
And God just healed her. Her dog, Maggie, jumped up. I'd tell you her name if I could remember it. How soon do you need to know? No, I'm kidding. Her dog jumped up and grabbed her lip and ripped her whole top lip off. And she was a preacher. And here she couldn't even speak, and they were going to, the surgery they were going to do, she'd never be able to smile. She'd only be able to talk out of that. And she just wasn't having it. And they tried to show her pictures of what they were going to make her mouth look like, and she refused to look at them. And she plastered her picture all over the house with a beautiful smile and everything. And this is what she said. She said, in essence, Christ resides inside of me.
Yes.
Therefore, heaven resides inside of me. And there is no illness in heaven. There is no sickness in heaven. So, Lip, I'm telling you that you are a part of heaven, and there is no sickness in heaven. You line up with it.
Yes.
And she said it, and she said it, and she said it, and it took 5 months. We're talking about a length of time. It wasn't overnight. She didn't wake up. 5 months, and she was on there, and she looked perfectly normal.
Yes. See?
Dr. Jesus, it was that attitude. She could have screamed. She could have shot the dog. I got a neighbor that put a bullet in his dog, Maggie, because she was coming over to our house. Now, if you ever had a reason to put a bullet, but no. She loved the dog, and she went straight to God.
Yes. But attitude is what I believe God wants us to have. He wants us to have a Jesus attitude.
Yes.
Is what I'm thinking. Because I know another lesson learned was years ago. My husband Wallace and I went to the hospital to see someone who we call critical.
Yeah.
And we walked in there, and you know how you go in and you say, well, I want to say, or maybe I need to pray or whatever else. Well, we went in with that attitude, you know, how we're going to encourage them.
Yeah.
Talking about attitude.
Yeah.
We got in there, Linda, and I tell you, that person lying in that bed, knowing that they only had a short time to live, encouraged us so much. We walked out of there. We were never, ever the same.
You wanted to crawl in bed with them, say, move over, I'm coming with you.
And that's the attitude.
Yes.
They knew that they were leaving here.
Yes.
They knew that God had decided that this is where they were no longer going to spend time on this side.
Yes.
But yet their attitude was to encourage those that are still here. And I thought that
you think about what are our last words before we leave. Ooh, Maggie, I hate to do this.
No.
I have to, though. Listen, you want another way to support us? Buy my books.
Yes.
Remember 40 Days of Healing Devotions? You want to help somebody get healed? These are stories of encouragement. They just have to read one a day. Yeah. And then Life Within the Veil. Yeah. If you'll use this for Bible study, we'll sell it for $5. You can get it at the... There's a new pharmacy on Baker Road. It's the Health Mart, Noonan Health Mart, and they carry my books, and also the New Christian Bookstore. They're wonderful. They're down on the square, and they sell my books and give us all the profits for it to help this program. So go and support those businesses. We need a good pharmacy, and we need to keep that Christian bookstore.
Yes.
Love you, girl. Glad you're back. And we'll see you next week.
For life.